The summer light spilled across Lady Eleanor Ashcombe's face as she stood frozen at the edge of her sister's wedding celebration, the crystal glass trembling slightly in her hand. At the garden, the Duke of Harrowden's cutting words about her still hung in the air, slicing through the festive music and laughter. Eleanor's spine straightened as something inside her pride long suppressed finally ignited, and she set her untouched champagne on a passing tray with deliberate calm. Guests parted before her determined stride as she crossed the manicured lawn toward the tall, imposing figure of James Harrowden, whose arrogant smile faltered when he recognized the look in her eyes. No one among the assembled nobility expected what happened next. The sharp crack of her palm against his cheek, the collective gasp of shock, and the first domino falling in a chain that would transform both their lives forever. Lady Eleanor Ashcombe had long ago accepted her position in society. At 28, she was firmly established as the sensible elder daughter of the Earl of Wexford, intelligent, proper, and destined for spinsterhood. While not unattractive, she lacked the vivacious charm and golden beauty of her younger sister, Catherine, whose wedding day had transformed the Wexford estate into a shimmering celebration of youth and promise. "Eleanor, darling, do try to smile," her mother whispered as they greeted yet another guest. "This is Catherine's day, but someone might still notice you." Elle nodded, maintaining the composed expression she had perfected over years of such comments. The Countess meant well, she knew. After all, a woman approaching 30 without prospects was a source of gentle concern for any mother. The June afternoon was perfect, warm sunshine filtering through ancient oaks, white ribbons fluttering from every branch, and champagne flowing as freely as the laughter. Catherine had married well, securing the hand of Viscount Pembroke, a match that elevated the family's standing and ensured her future happiness. Eleanor was genuinely pleased for her sister, despite the inevitable comparisons that such occasions invited. "You've arranged everything beautifully," Lady Harrington commented, patting Eleanor's arm. "Such a talent for organization. It's a shame you haven't had your own wedding. But I suppose managing households suits you just as well." Eleanor thanked her politely, then excused herself to check on the refreshments. She had learned to navigate these waters with grace, to accept compliments that carried the sting of pity beneath their surface. Near the rose garden, she paused to catch her breath. The guests were beginning to move toward the grand marquee for the wedding breakfast, and she would soon be required to take her place at the family table. Just a moment of solitude first, she thought, adjusting the pale blue silk of her gown, a color her mother had deemed appropriate for her complexion and station. It was then that she heard the voices from the other side of the hedge, male voices, one of which she immediately recognized as belonging to the Duke of Harrowden. James Harrowden was a widower of formidable reputation, known for his sharp wit and sharper tongue. His presence at the wedding was a coup for the family, though Eleanor had always found his cold gray eyes unsettling. "Quite a charming affair, I must admit," someone was saying. "The young bride is a vision." "Indeed," came the Duke's distinctive baritone. "Though I confess I was momentarily confused about which Ashcombe daughter was marrying. The elder one. What's her name? Eleanor. She's hovering about like a shadow at her own funeral." Eleanor froze, her hand gripping the back of a stone bench. "Come now, Harrowden, that's unkind." The other man chuckled, not sounding particularly disapproving. "Is it unkind to speak the truth? Look at her, plain as porridge, managing the servants when she should be seeking a husband. Though I suppose at her age, the opportunity has rather passed her by. Some women simply lack the quality that makes a man take notice. She's the Earl's daughter, nonetheless. A title doesn't bestow value where nature has withheld it," the Duke replied dismissively. "I've seen more charm in my housekeeper. At least she knows her worth, and doesn't pretend to be something she isn't." Eleanor's cheeks burned as if she'd been struck. She had endured countless subtle slights over the years, but never had she heard herself dismissed so cruelly, so completely. The words pierced through the armor of dignity she had built around herself, without conscious thought. She stepped around the hedge. The Duke of Harrowden stood there, tall and imposing in his formal attire, a glass of champagne held carelessly in one hand. Beside him, Lord Blackwood looked uncomfortable as he noticed Eleanor's approach. "Your Grace," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "I believe you were discussing my value, or lack thereof." The Duke's expression shifted from surprise to something like amusement. "Lady Eleanor, I was merely observing that I am plain, unwanted, and presumptuous," she finished for him. "How fortunate that I happened to overhear your assessment. It saves me the trouble of forming a mistaken good opinion of you." Lord Blackwood muttered something about checking on the other guests and hastily departed, leaving them alone in the secluded corner of the garden. "You misunderstand me," the Duke said, though his tone suggested he was more annoyed at being confronted than regretful of his words. "I understand perfectly, Your Grace." Eleanor stepped closer, a lifetime of suppressed anger suddenly finding its voice. "You believe that a woman's worth is measured solely by her ability to attract a husband, that beauty and youth are the only currencies of value, that I, having neither in sufficient quantity, should accept my place in the shadows." I spoke carelessly, his jaw tightening. "It was not meant for your ears, which makes it worse, not better," she replied. "What you say when you believe no one is listening reveals your true character, Your Grace, and yours, I find, is sorely lacking." Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "You presume too much, Lady Eleanor. And you presume that your title grants you the right to wound with impunity." What happened next occurred without thought or planning. Eleanor's hand rose and connected with the Duke's cheek in a slap that echoed in the quiet garden. The sound seemed to hang in the air between them, as shocking to her as it clearly was to him. His gray eyes widened, his hand rising to his reddening cheek. For a moment, neither spoke. Then reality crashed in around Eleanor. She had struck a duke, one of the most powerful men in England, at her sister's wedding. The scandal would be immediate and devastating. "Lady Eleanor." Her father's voice cut through her horror. The Earl of Wexford stood at the garden entrance, his face ashen. Behind him, several guests stared in undisguised shock. That evening, after the last guests had departed, and Catherine and her new husband had left for their wedding journey, Eleanor sat in her father's study as her parents decided her fate. "She must leave London immediately," her mother insisted, pacing the carpet. "The gossip will be unbearable. Harrowden could destroy us socially if he chooses." Her father added gravely, "You struck a duke, Eleanor, a duke." Eleanor sat silently, the enormity of her actions settling upon her shoulders. "Your Aunt Augusta has agreed to take you in," her father finally said. "Her cottage in Derbyshire is remote enough. You'll stay there until this blows over, if it ever does." Eleanor nodded, accepting her exile. One moment of defiance had cost her dearly. Yet as she climbed the stairs to pack her belongings, she could not bring herself to regret it entirely. Aunt Augusta's cottage, nestled in a valley of the Derbyshire countryside, its stone walls weathered by time, and surrounded by gardens that had grown wild with neglect. It was nothing like the grandeur of Wexford House, but as Eleanor stepped from the carriage after the long journey, she felt something unexpected, relief. "There you are at last," Aunt Augusta called from the doorway, a widow of 60 with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. She was the family's most independent member. "I've been told you've caused quite the scandal. Good for you." Eleanor couldn't help but smile. "I'm not sure Father would agree with that assessment." "Your father worries too much about what others think," Augusta replied, leading her inside. "Come, I'll show you to your room. It's small, but it has the best view of the hills." The cottage was indeed modest compared to what Eleanor was accustomed to, but it possessed a charm that larger homes often lacked. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes on every subject imaginable. Sunlight streamed through windows framed by simple curtains, and a piano stood in the corner of the sitting room, its keys yellowed with age. "I play rarely now," Augusta explained, following Eleanor's gaze, "but you're welcome to it. I remember you had some talent." "Thank you, Aunt," Eleanor replied, touched by the consideration, "and thank you for taking me in. I know it was unexpected." Augusta waved away her gratitude. "Nonsense. I've been wanting company, and you've been needing escape. This arrangement suits us both." The first weeks of Eleanor's exile passed in quiet routine. Mornings were spent helping Augusta with the garden, afternoons reading, or walking the nearby hills, and evenings by the fire, often in companionable silence. There were no balls to attend, no social obligations to fulfill, no constant reminders of her status as the unmarried daughter. "You seem different here," Augusta observed one evening, as they sat shelling peas from the garden. "More yourself." Eleanor considered this. "I suppose I am. There's no one watching, judging, comparing. Catherine's shadow is long," Augusta said matter-of-factly. "But only because you've stood in it willingly." The words stung with their truth. What choice did I have? She was always the beautiful one, the charming one. And you decided to be the sensible one, the dutiful one. Augusta's eyes were kind, but unflinching. "We all make choices, Eleanor, even when we think we're simply accepting our fate." The conversation lingered in Eleanor's mind in the days that followed. She began to write in a journal Augusta had given her, exploring thoughts she'd never allowed herself to acknowledge. Who was she when not defined as Catherine's plain older sister? What did she want beyond the narrow expectations that had shaped her life? It was during this period of self-discovery that the letter arrived. Eleanor recognized the ducal seal immediately, her heart racing as she broke it open. "Lady Eleanor, I write to express my sincere regret for the words you overheard at your sister's wedding. They were thoughtless and unjustified, spoken without consideration for their cruelty or truth. While your response was perhaps more forceful than society might condone, I cannot claim it was undeserved. Please accept my apology and my assurance that I have said nothing of the incident to others. Your servant." Harrowden. Eleanor read the letter twice, unsure how to feel about this unexpected olive branch. The apology seemed genuine enough, yet something about its formal tone rang hollow. After consideration, she decided not to reply. The Duke of Harrowden had said his piece. She had no obligation to ease his conscience. Life at the cottage continued unchanged until one rainy afternoon 3 weeks later. Eleanor was reading by the window when the sound of carriage wheels on the gravel drive drew her attention. Few visitors came to Augusta's remote home, and none were expected. "Good heavens," Augusta said, peering through the rain-streaked glass. "It appears we have a guest of some consequence." Eleanor joined her at the window and felt her breath catch. Stepping down from an elegant carriage was the tall figure of the Duke of Harrowden, his dark coat glistening with raindrops. "Did you invite him?" Augusta asked, eyebrows raised. "Certainly not," Eleanor replied, her mind racing. "I didn't even respond to his letter." "Interesting." Augusta smoothed her skirts. "Well, we cannot leave a duke standing in the rain, regardless of past grievances. I shall receive him." Before Eleanor could protest, Augusta had bustled to the door, left with no choice. Eleanor straightened her simple day dress and prepared to face the man she had struck and subsequently fled from. The Duke entered the sitting room with Augusta, removing his hat to reveal dark hair touched with silver at the temples. His gray eyes found Eleanor immediately, and she was surprised to see uncertainty in them, an expression she had never associated with the formidable James Harrowden. "Lady Eleanor," he said, bowing slightly, "I hope you will forgive this intrusion." "Your Grace," she replied coolly, "it is unexpected." Augusta looked between them with undisguised interest. "I shall see about some tea. You two clearly have matters to discuss." When they were alone, an uncomfortable silence fell. The Duke remained standing, seeming uncharacteristically hesitant. "You didn't respond to my letter," he finally said. "I didn't believe a response was required," Eleanor replied. "You apologized. I acknowledged it silently, yet you didn't accept it." "Should I have?" She met his gaze directly. "Your words revealed what you truly think of me. An apology doesn't undo that knowledge." He frowned. "I spoke carelessly without knowing you, which makes it worse," she countered. "You judged me based solely on appearance and circumstance." The Duke took a step toward her, then seemed to think better of it. "You're right," he said, surprising her. "That's why I've come. A written apology was insufficient. I wanted to make amends in person." "Why?" Eleanor asked, genuinely puzzled. "What does it matter what I think of you?" Something shifted in his expression. Vulnerability, perhaps, or simple honesty. "Because no one has ever challenged me as you did." Because your opinion, I find, matters more than it should. Their conversation was interrupted by Augusta's return with tea. The three sat in strained politeness as rain drummed against the windows. The Duke answering Augusta's questions about London with distracted courtesy, his eyes repeatedly returning to Eleanor. When he finally rose to leave, he addressed Eleanor directly. I'm staying at Thornfield Hall, my property nearby, for the next fortnight. Perhaps we might speak again. Eleanor hesitated, torn between curiosity and caution. I walk in the mornings, she said finally, by the stream that crosses the eastern meadow. He nodded, understanding her implicit permission. Until tomorrow, then. After he had gone, Augusta turned to Eleanor with raised eyebrows. Well, that was unexpected. A duke seeking forgiveness from the woman who slapped him. I do believe you've made quite an impression, my dear. Eleanor stood at the door through which he had departed, wondering if she'd just made another mistake or taken the first step towards something entirely new. The eastern meadow path was damp with morning dew as Eleanor walked its familiar curves. She had risen earlier than usual, her sleep disturbed by thoughts of the Duke's visit and what might come of their meeting. Part of her had hoped he wouldn't appear, that yesterday's encounter would remain an isolated incident. Another part, one she was reluctant to acknowledge, waited with curious anticipation. She spotted him before he saw her, a tall figure standing by the stream, hands clasped behind his back as he watched the water flow. In his riding clothes rather than formal attire, he seemed less imposing, almost approachable. When he turned at the sound of her footsteps, his expression was guarded, but not unwelcoming. Lady Eleanor, he greeted her with a slight bow. I wasn't certain you would come. This is my daily walk, she replied. I saw no reason to alter my routine. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Of course. May I join you? She nodded, and they fell into step together, an awkward silence stretching between them. The path wound alongside the stream, through a copse of birch trees whose leaves shimmered in the morning light. You seem at home here, he observed after several minutes. I am, Eleanor admitted. More than I expected to be. It's quite different from London. That's its primary virtue. He glanced at her, seeming to weigh his next words. Do you miss society? Parts of it, she said honestly. The music, perhaps. Certain friends. But not the constant awareness of being watched and found wanting. The Duke frowned. Was it so terrible? Eleanor stopped walking, turning to face him directly. Your Grace, James, he interrupted. Please, if we are to speak honestly, call me James. The request surprised her. James, then. You asked if being in society was terrible. You, of all people, should know the answer. You put it into words quite eloquently at my sister's wedding. He winced. I deserved that. Yes, she agreed, you did. But to answer your question, society is wonderful for those who fit its narrow definition of value. For the rest of us, it is a constant exercise in pretending the slights don't wound. They resumed walking, the Duke, James, quieter now, thoughtful. When they reached a fallen log by the stream's edge, he gestured to it. Shall we rest a moment? Eleanor hesitated, then sat, leaving ample space between them. James remained standing, his gaze on the flowing water. I've been thinking about what you said. He finally spoke. About judging without knowing. You were right. It's a habit I've cultivated, this distance, this coldness. Why? She asked simply. He seemed startled by the directness of her question. I suppose because it's easier than the alternative, which is engagement, vulnerability. He looked at her then, his gray eyes troubled. I've not always been this way. Or perhaps I have, and never noticed the damage it caused until too late. Eleanor studied him, seeing beyond the aristocratic features to something raw and unguarded. What changed? My wife died, he said quietly, 3 years ago. I'm sorry, Eleanor offered, though the words felt inadequate. Most people don't know the circumstances, he continued, his voice low. There was an illness, yes, but before that, he trailed off, then straightened his shoulders. I should go. I've taken enough of your morning. Eleanor surprised herself by saying, Tomorrow then, same time. Something like relief crossed his face. Tomorrow. Their morning walks became a routine over the following days. At first, conversation remained cautious, circling around safe topics, books they had read, music they enjoyed, observations about the changing countryside. Gradually, however, a tentative companionship developed. Eleanor found herself looking forward to their meetings, to the unexpected insights James offered, and to the way he actually listened when she spoke, as if her thoughts mattered. On the 5th day they took shelter in a small stone outbuilding when a sudden shower caught them halfway through their walk. Rain drummed on the slate roof as they stood in the doorway, watching water cascade from the eaves. "My wife, Caroline," James said suddenly, breaking a comfortable silence. She used to love the rain, said it washed the world clean, gave everything a second chance. Eleanor turned to him, surprised by the personal revelation. His profile was etched against the gray light, his expression distant. "You haven't spoken of her before," she said gently. "No." He drew a deep breath. "The truth is, Eleanor, I've been carrying a guilt that few understand. When I spoke so cruelly at your sister's wedding, I was echoing words I once used against Caroline." Eleanor stilled, waiting. "She wasn't what society expected in a duchess," he continued, his voice barely audible above the rain. "Too quiet, too bookish, lacking the social graces that my mother deemed essential. And God help me, I made her aware of every shortcoming, not with shouting or obvious cruelty, but with subtle corrections, with silence when she sought approval, with public indifference." He turned to face Eleanor fully now, his eyes haunted. "When you confronted me in that garden, when you spoke of wounding with impunity, it was as if Caroline herself were speaking through you, naming the sin I've never acknowledged aloud." The rain fell harder, creating a curtain of water beyond the doorway. Inside their shelter, time seemed suspended. "What happened to her?" Eleanor asked softly. "She withdrew, piece by piece, became a ghost in our home. When illness came, she had no fight left." His voice broke slightly. "The doctors said consumption took her, but I know the truth. I had already broken her spirit long before the disease claimed her body." Eleanor felt the weight of his confession, understanding now the layers beneath his arrogance, his cutting remarks. "And that's why my slap affected you so deeply. It wasn't the physical act." "No," he agreed. "It was being called to account finally, for the man I had become, for using words as weapons, and pretending there was no blood drawn." Eleanor moved closer, not touching him, but offering her presence. "Why tell me this?" "Because you deserve to know that my insult to you wasn't about you at all. It was about me, my guilt, my self-loathing projected outward." He met her gaze directly. "And because I find myself caring what you think of me, Eleanor, more than I've cared about anyone's opinion in a very long time." The intimacy of the moment, of his raw honesty, created something new between them. A fragile understanding that felt both dangerous and precious. "I think," Eleanor said carefully, "that recognizing one's mistakes is the first step toward not repeating them." "Is that forgiveness?" he asked, a vulnerability in his question that touched her deeply. "It's a beginning," she replied. The rain began to ease, sunlight breaking through clouds to create a shimmering curtain of droplets. They stepped from their shelter into the freshly washed world, walking side by side in a silence that no longer felt awkward but companionable, even comforting. In the days that followed, their conversations deepened. They discovered shared interests in poetry and history. James brought books from Thornfield's library that he thought might interest her. Eleanor shared her observations about the natural world she had come to love during her exile. They debated ideas, sometimes heatedly, but always with a fundamental respect that Eleanor had rarely experienced. Aunt Augusta watched their developing friendship with keen interest, but made no comment beyond an occasional knowing smile. The Duke became a regular visitor to the cottage, joining them for tea or bringing small gifts. Fresh honey from his estate's hives, wildflowers arranged by his gardener. One evening, as they sat in Augusta's small parlor, while rain tapped gently against the windows, Eleanor realized with sudden clarity that something fundamental had shifted. The man whose cruel words had driven her from London had become someone whose company she valued, whose thoughts she respected, whose presence brought warmth rather than pain. The realization was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. The letter from Eleanor's mother arrived 6 weeks into her stay at Aunt Augusta's cottage. Its contents were alarming. My dear Eleanor, I write with some urgency regarding matters that have come to our attention. Rumors have reached London society that the Duke of Harrowden has been making regular visits to your aunt's residence. While I would normally dismiss such gossip, Lady Blackwood has confirmed sightings of His Grace's carriage at Augusta's cottage. You must understand how this appears. After the incident at Catherine's wedding, any association between yourself and the Duke invites speculation of the most damaging kind. Some suggest a clandestine romance, others a more calculated arrangement. Neither reflects well upon our family. Your father insists you return to London immediately, where we can better manage these rumors and perhaps salvage your reputation. I have persuaded him to wait for your response. But I urge you to consider our position carefully, with concern. Your mother, Eleanor, set the letter down, her hands trembling slightly. She had been naive to think their meetings could remain private in a society that thrived on gossip, even in remote Derbyshire. There were eyes to observe and tongues to wag. Troubling news, Augusta asked, noting her niece's expression. Eleanor handed her the letter. It seems James's visits have not gone unnoticed. Augusta read quickly, her eyebrows rising. Well, your mother certainly has a talent for making concern sound like accusation. She returned the letter with a sigh. What will you do? I don't know, Eleanor admitted. I found peace here, away from society's judgment, but I can't hide forever. Is it hiding? Augusta challenged gently. Or is it living authentically for the first time? Before Eleanor could answer, their housekeeper announced another visitor, not the Duke this time, but Lady Harrowden, his mother. The Dowager Duchess entered Augusta's sitting room like a battleship under full sail, her elegant mourning clothes, emphasizing her regal bearing and the disapproval etched into her features. Lady Augusta, she acknowledged with a nod before turning her attention to Eleanor. Lady Eleanor, I believe we have matters to discuss. Augusta, unintimidated by rank, gestured to a chair. Tea, Your Grace. Or perhaps something stronger. I find difficult conversations often benefit from fortification. The Dowager's lips thinned. Tea will suffice. Once they were settled with cups in hand, the Duchess addressed Eleanor directly. I shall be blunt, Lady Eleanor. My son has always been a man of sound judgment until recent months. His frequent visits here have become a subject of speculation in circles that matter. Eleanor met her gaze steadily. I'm aware of the rumors, Your Grace. They arrived by post this morning. Then you understand my concern. James holds one of the oldest dukedoms in England. His choice of companions reflects not only on himself, but on our family legacy. And you find me unsuitable, Eleanor stated rather than asked. The Duchess sipped her tea before answering. I find the circumstances unsuitable. A woman who publicly struck my son, who was sent away in disgrace, now receiving his regular attention. It suggests either a scandalous liaison, or worse, a manipulation. Augusta made a sound of protest, but Eleanor raised a hand to stop her. You believe I'm using your son's guilt to improve my position? The thought has occurred to many, the Dowager replied coldly. My son is vulnerable in ways few understand. His wife's death affected him deeply. I know, Eleanor said quietly. He told me. Something flickered in the older woman's eyes, surprise perhaps or concern. Did he? Then you understand why I must protect him, even from himself. James has responsibilities that transcend personal feelings. The dukedom requires an appropriate alliance, not a match born of misplaced guilt or rebellion. Eleanor felt a chill settle in her chest. The Duchess had articulated the very fear that had been growing in her own heart, that James's attention stemmed not from genuine regard, but from a need for absolution. I assure you, Your Grace, she said carefully, I have never sought or encouraged any alliance with your son. Our conversations have been just that. Conversations between two people who have found unexpected common ground. Perhaps that is how it began, the Duchess conceded. But it cannot continue, for both your sakes. After the Dowager had departed, Eleanor stood by the window, watching the elegant carriage disappear down the lane. Augusta approached, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. You mustn't let her dictate your choices, she said firmly. It's not that simple, Eleanor replied. What if she's right? What if James sees me only as a form of penance? The question lingered, unanswered, until James himself arrived the following afternoon. He found Eleanor in the garden, among the late summer roses. "You seem troubled," he observed, studying her face. "Has something happened?" Eleanor hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Your mother paid us a visit yesterday." His expression darkened. "I see." And she expressed her disapproval, I imagine. "She believes your interest in me stems from guilt, not genuine regard." "My mother presumes to know my mind better than I do myself," he said, his voice tight with anger. "Does she?" Eleanor challenged, meeting his gaze directly. "James, we've never spoken of what this is between us. I need to know, am I your penance? Your way of making amends for past wrongs?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. James reached for her hand, but Eleanor stepped back. "I need clarity," she insisted. "I will not be the means by which you punish yourself for Caroline. I will not be chosen out of guilt or defiance." His face showed conflicting emotions, frustration, confusion, and something deeper that he seemed unable to express. "It's not that simple, Eleanor." "Then make it simple," she demanded, her voice breaking slightly. "Either you see me for who I am, or we end this now, before London's whispers become shouts, and both our families suffer further." James stood silent, struggling visibly with words that wouldn't come. In his hesitation, Eleanor found her answer. "I think you should go," she said quietly. "We both need time to consider what we truly want." As she watched him walk away, Eleanor felt a familiar pain, the ache of being once again found wanting, though for entirely different reasons than before. A fortnight passed without word from James. Eleanor threw herself into helping Augusta prepare the cottage for winter, pressing flowers for preservation and walking alone along paths that now held memories of conversations shared and understandings reached. She wrote to her mother, promising to return to London after Christmas, when the worst of the gossip would have subsided. Autumn painted the Derbyshire hills in russet and gold, a beauty that Eleanor observed with a heart that felt increasingly hollow. She had not realized how deeply James had woven himself into her daily thoughts until his absence left a palpable void. "You're moping," Augusta declared one rainy afternoon as they sorted through her collection of books. "It doesn't suit you." "I'm not moping," Eleanor protested weakly. "I'm reflecting on what might have been." Augusta handed her a volume of poetry. "Put this with the Romantics, would you?" Eleanor shelved the book, running her fingers along its leather spine. "I did the right thing, didn't I? Asking for clarity." "Absolutely," Augusta affirmed, though I suspect his inability to answer had less to do with uncertainty about you and more to do with uncertainty about himself. Before Eleanor could respond, they heard the sound of carriage wheels on gravel. Both women looked toward the window, where rain streamed down the glass, obscuring the view. "Are we expecting anyone?" Eleanor asked, her heart suddenly racing. Augusta smiled knowingly. "I wasn't, but perhaps you were." The housekeeper appeared at the library door. "Your Grace, the Duke of Harrowden requests an audience. He's quite drenched, poor man." "I've shown him to the sitting room." Eleanor remained frozen, indecision paralyzing her. Augusta gave her a gentle push toward the door. "Go," she urged. "Hear what he has to say. You can always send him back into the rain if you don't like it." James stood by the fireplace, his riding coat dripping onto the hearthstones. He turned as Eleanor entered, and the intensity in his gray eyes made her breath catch. "Eleanor," he said simply, as if her name itself held meaning beyond its syllables. "You're wet," she observed, immediately feeling foolish for stating the obvious. A smile touched his lips. "Yes, I rode rather than taking the carriage. I needed clarity." The word hung between them, an echo of their last conversation. "And did you find it?" she asked, remaining by the door, unwilling to move closer until she understood his purpose. "I did." He took a step toward her, then stopped, seeming to respect her need for distance. "These past 2 weeks have been instructive. I've had time to examine my feelings, my motivations, to separate guilt from truth." Eleanor waited, hardly daring to breathe. "You asked if you were my penance," he continued. "The answer is no, not anymore. Perhaps at first, when I sought you out after that letter, there was an element of atonement in my actions. But something changed during our walks, our conversations." He moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. I discovered a woman of remarkable intelligence and courage, someone who sees the world with clear eyes, yet maintains a fundamental kindness, someone who challenged me to be better, not through demands, but through her own example. Eleanor felt tears threatening and blinked them back. James, please, he interrupted gently. Let me finish. I've rehearsed this rather thoroughly on the ride here. Despite herself, Eleanor smiled. I cannot promise perfection, James said, his voice deepening with emotion. I am still learning how to be the man I should have been years ago, but I can promise truth, Eleanor, and the truth is that I love you, not as recompense for past wrongs, but for the future I can imagine only with you. He closed the remaining distance between them, taking her hands in his. They were cold from the rain, yet his touch warmed her completely. I don't want a duchess who will bend to my will or echo my mother's values, he continued. I want a partner who will challenge me when I'm wrong, support me when I'm right, and stand beside me as we build something new together. Eleanor looked up at him, seeing vulnerability and hope in equal measure. Are you certain? Society will talk. They'll say you married beneath you, or that I somehow trapped you. Let them talk, he said firmly. I've spent too many years caring about the wrong things, hurting those I should have cherished. I won't make that mistake again. He released one of her hands to reach into his coat, withdrawing a small box. This belonged to my grandmother, who by all accounts was as formidable and independent-minded as you. I think she would approve. Inside the box lay a ring of sapphires and diamonds, elegant in its simplicity. Eleanor stared at it, then back at James. Is this a proposal, Your Grace? She asked, a smile beginning to form. It is, Lady Eleanor, he replied, his own smile matching hers. Though I warn you, accepting means taking on a man still learning how to love properly, a formidable mother-in-law, and a lifetime of being underestimated by society, until they know you as I do. Eleanor's laugh was soft but genuine. Those terms seem acceptable. When he kissed her, it was gentle and brief, a promise rather than a passion, a beginning rather than an end. The days that followed brought a flurry of activity. Letters were dispatched to Eleanor's parents, explaining the engagement and requesting their blessing. To Eleanor's surprise, her mother's response was swift and unexpectedly warm. My dear daughter, while the circumstances are unusual, your father and I cannot deny the advantages of such a match. More importantly, your letter speaks of a happiness I have long wished for you. If the Duke truly values you as you describe, then we give our blessing wholeheartedly. Catherine sends her love and insists you must be married from Wexford House, with all the ceremony befitting a future duchess. With renewed affection, your mother Eleanor read the letter to Augusta, who snorted at the mention of advantages, but smiled at the overall tone. Families, she said with a shake of her head. They often come around when least expected. The reconciliation was completed when Catherine herself arrived at the cottage. Having insisted on traveling, despite the autumn chill, I had to see for myself, she explained, embracing Eleanor tightly. My sensible sister, engaged to a duke, and not just any duke, but the one she slapped at my wedding. Catherine, Eleanor protested, but her sister's affectionate teasing held no malice. Later, as they walked in Augusta's garden, Catherine grew serious. I've always envied you, you know. Eleanor stared at her in disbelief. Envied me. But you were always the beautiful one, the accomplished one. I was the one everyone noticed, Catherine corrected. But you were the one with substance, with opinions and courage. I married well, yes, but you've done something far braver. You've chosen your own path, despite what anyone thought. The sisters embraced again, a new understanding between them dissolving years of unspoken comparison. As preparations for their return to London began, Eleanor found herself standing in Augusta's small library, where James had proposed. Her aunt joined her, placing a gentle hand on her arm. Are you ready for what comes next? Augusta asked. Society will not make it easy. Eleanor thought of the journey ahead, of facing the ton as James's chosen bride, of standing beside him as he continued his own path toward becoming a better man, of building a life based on mutual respect rather than convention. Yes, she said with quiet confidence, I believe I am. London in early winter was a far cry from the peaceful Derbyshire countryside. As their carriage rolled through the crowded streets toward Harrowden House, Eleanor felt the weight of what lay ahead, her first appearance in society since the scandal. Now as the Duke's betrothed. "Nervous?" James asked, his hand covering hers. "A little," she admitted. "Last time I was in London, I was being whispered about as the spinster who struck a duke. Now I return as his future Duchess. It's rather a dramatic reversal. One that will give the gossips material for months," he said with a wry smile. "But we face them together." Harrowden House stood imposing on Berkeley Square, its classical facade a testament to generations of wealth and power. As Eleanor ascended the steps on James's arm, she was acutely aware of the watchful eyes of the servants, the weight of history in the ancestral portraits lining the grand entrance hall, and the formidable presence of the Dowager Duchess waiting at the top of the main staircase. "Mother," James greeted her, his tone respectful but firm. "May I present my fiancée, Lady Eleanor Ashcombe?" The Dowager's expression revealed little as she inclined her head. "Lady Eleanor, welcome to Harrowden House." "Thank you, Your Grace," Eleanor replied, meeting the older woman's gaze steadily. "I look forward to becoming better acquainted." A flicker of something, perhaps reluctant approval, crossed the Dowager's face. "Indeed, we shall have much to discuss regarding the responsibilities you will assume." It was not warmth, but it was acceptance of a sort. Eleanor would take it as a beginning. The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparations. There were trousseau fittings, meetings with the Harrowden House staff, and endless social calls to receive congratulations that often concealed curiosity or envy. Eleanor faced it all with a quiet dignity that surprised even those who had known her before. "You've changed," her mother observed during one of their wedding planning sessions. "There's a confidence about you now." "I've found my voice," Eleanor replied simply, "and someone who values hearing it." Their first true test came at Lady Blackwood's winter ball. The same Lady Blackwood who had confirmed the rumors of James's visits to Derbyshire. As Eleanor and James entered the ballroom, conversation faltered noticeably before resuming with increased intensity. "Courage," James murmured, his hand at the small of her back. They moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations with grace while ignoring the speculative glances and whispered comments. When they reached Lady Blackwood, the hostess's smile was tight with barely concealed disapproval. "Your Grace, Lady Eleanor, how unexpected to see you both here tonight." "Not at all," James replied smoothly. "Where better to introduce my future Duchess to society? Lady Eleanor brings fresh perspective to conversations that have grown rather stale. Don't you find?" Lady Blackwood's smile froze as she recognized the subtle rebuke. Before she could respond, Lord Pembroke, Catherine's husband, approached with a genuine smile. "Harrowden, and my dear sister-in-law, Catherine, will be delighted you've come. She's been telling everyone how pleased she is about the match." The sincere support from such a respected quarter shifted the atmosphere perceptibly. Throughout the evening, others who might have been inclined to snub the couple thought better of it when they observed the Pembrokes' warm acceptance. Later, as they danced together for the first time in public, Eleanor felt the weight of observation, but found she cared less than she had expected. "They're all watching us," she noted, as James guided her through the steps of the waltz. "Let them," he replied, his eyes holding hers. "They see what they expect, a duke and his chosen bride. They don't see what matters." "And what's that?" His hand tightened slightly on hers. "That I am a better man with you than I ever was without you. That we are building something true, regardless of their approval." In the months that followed, as winter yielded to spring and their wedding approached, Eleanor and James established a pattern that would define their life together. They hosted small, intimate gatherings rather than grand balls. They were seen at select cultural events, the opera, art exhibitions, but avoided the more frivolous aspects of the season. Most significantly, they spent time together in the private gardens behind Harrowden House, a space that James had neglected for years, but which now flourished under Eleanor's attention. There, away from society's gaze, they read to each other, debated ideas, and built the foundation of a partnership based on mutual respect. The wedding itself was elegant but not ostentatious, held at Wexford House as Catherine had insisted. With family and close friends in attendance, Eleanor wore a gown of pale blue silk, reminiscent of what she had worn at her sister's wedding, but now chosen for its beauty rather than its appropriateness. As they exchanged vows, Eleanor thought of how far they had both come from that summer day when words had wounded, and a slap had echoed across a garden. The journey had not been easy, but it had been necessary for both of them. "I pronounce you man and wife, Duke and Duchess of Harrowden," the bishop declared, and a new chapter began, 6 months into their marriage. As they walked through their garden on a mild autumn afternoon, James placed a gentle hand on Eleanor's slightly rounded stomach. "Are you happy?" he asked, a question he still posed occasionally, as if reassuring himself that he was not repeating past mistakes. Eleanor covered his hand with her own. "Deeply," she answered truthfully. "Though I never imagined that slapping a duke would lead to becoming his duchess and the mother of his child." James laughed, the sound freer than it had once been. "Nor did I imagine that being slapped would be the beginning of my salvation." They continued their walk in comfortable silence, past late-blooming roses and leaves turning gold, from scandal to duchess, from wounded souls to healing hearts. Their story had unfolded in ways neither could have predicted, but both now cherished, in London drawing rooms. The tale of their unusual courtship still circulated, embellished with each telling, but the truth was simpler and more profound. Two people who had found in each other not what society demanded, but what their hearts required: honesty, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again.